Yes, this meeting is being recorded for people who couldn't get on this morning. We're up here in the Rocky Mountains, a beautiful sunny day. Things are starting to ever so slowly cool off up here, but it is a gorgeous day to be around. Today is going to be, we have Rufus Jones. Look at how skinny this book is. Available, of course, in our bookstore. Rufus Jones, who was a Quaker, lived in the late 19th and through the first half of the 20th century. A man named Rufus Jones. And I was telling Ghislaine that there's a bit of a separation. On the one side is Rufus Jones with Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection and Teresa of Lisieux and Henry David Thoreau. And on the other side is Thomas Keating and Thomas Merton and the Cloud of Unknowing. What was interesting about Rufus Jones, see, we need to keep in context, especially those of you who are Catholic, that early in the 20th century, about 1905 or something like that, there had been something developing in the 19th century, which was a modern look at spirituality and the scriptures, and let's update our church relative to all the new things we're discovering in archaeology, and science, and so on and so forth, that affect our understanding of our religion and scripture and so on and so forth. History was being improved. And some people got to the Pope and said, no, let's not change it all. And so he shot down what was called modernism. And the Roman Catholic Church went into kind of the dark ages of education. And the seminaries really didn't educate its priests in a lot of our history. It was just going to stay put. And one of the things that had been dropped some centuries before was the whole sense of meditation, not just contemplation, but meditation. Sort of sitting with. And so we didn't know in our Catholic tradition, we really didn't know about a lot of the contemplative books, history of our church until the second half of the 20th century. Rufus Jones, on the other hand, a Quaker, lived in the first half of the 20th century, and he read these books. Like the Cloud of Unknowing. The apophatic tradition says, stop paying attention to your thoughts, stop words, just open yourself to the presence of God. And, that's kind of John of the Cross and so on and so forth. Rufus didn't like it. He read it and he didn't like it. And he said, phooey on that. And so we're going to go into Rufus this morning in some of that area and see the great wisdom that he has to share with us. It's not that his way is the only way. It's to keep in mind Thomas Keating's way is not the only way. And all those people who are into centering prayer need to keep in mind a balance. So what and the best of the centering prayer people do. Okay, the best of them do. But when the great emphasis is in letting go and sort of this idea of emptying, Rufus isn't for that. And he's got a reason why. He says the single greatest help to a spiritual life is not, I'll just say what it is a deep human love for another. A deep human love for another person is the single greatest help for the spiritual life. And we need to keep this in mind because that reminds us that we are a we, not a me and you, but a we. And we are at our best when we are a we, not when it's me and you. So he doesn't have much interest in celibacy, and he certainly doesn't have a lot of interest in isolating yourself in a cell someplace. Um, that just didn't speak to him. And this, I think, is part of the whole Quaker way of looking at things. I'm not saying that other Christian groups or the Catholic groups don't have this, but I'm not so sure it's a great emphasis. In my tradition, still a lot of people want to go to church and they want to worship between themselves and what's going on the altar. They're not too concerned about the people next to them. As a matter of fact, a lot of Catholics would prefer not to have anybody right next to them. They like their space. Quakers aren't like that. They're not looking for space so much. They can sit in a room and all be sitting in their chairs or benches and all be silent and still, aware of that there's other people in the room, and it doesn't bother them. A big thing about the Quakers is to be of service to the world and not to be in battle with it. Um, but it starts out with a deep human love for another person. I've met people who say they love everybody, but they don't like the people they live with. Matter of fact, they don't do very well at all with the people they live with, but they say they love the world. As long as you don't live with me, I'll love you. And we all know that's false. And I think that Rufus is challenging that attitude of going into your cell and being silent and still and not paying attention to anything that's around you or any of your thoughts, even a God thought. And he says, because I don't know if he says it, but the idea is you come out of your cell and you're still isolating. Too many people just live in their own little orbits and they call themselves monks. So he'd have no use for the desert fathers or mothers. He felt that what the Quakers needed to do, the society, by the way, of friends, was to get back to the early church, not the desert fathers and mothers, the earlier church than that. That was a church consumed with togetherness and reaching out to include more and more. So what he wants to do is recover the simple life of early Christianity, not just to tolerate other people, which is something that is sometimes done. And some people will tolerate because they want to avoid issues. On the Enneagram, I think they might be a 6. I'm not sure, a 6 or a 4. They don't want issues. They don't want any controversy. So they tolerate. That's not loving another person. So he's against all theories and notions. He doesn't want to get caught up in a lot of your doctrinal stuff. What he's focusing on is the inner experience. So when Quakers gather together, the first thing they're not looking to start out with someone telling them what they're supposed to think or who God is or some sort of a doctrinal stuff. They're not looking for that. They're looking first for the inner experience, because the inner experience, which for them engages the mind, is what will begin to transform them so that they can actually love another human being who they encounter on a regular basis. So he calls this the true light. He says Jesus, he's Christian. Jesus is the true light who enlightens everyone. Doctrine doesn't necessarily enlighten anybody, nor does it make you more loving to other people. So he says, Jesus is the true light. Now, let's see if we can connect some of this to the other side, if you will, so that we don't think there's another side, but a balance. We'll call it a balance. John of the Cross. What does John of the Cross say? He says, he's taken into the darkness by God. I mean, I don't think you can enter in on your own, but you can allow yourself to enter in. He's very apophatic. Don't pay attention to any thoughts. And he gets taken into the darkness, but he says darkness is not really dark. It's just that the light of Christ is so pure that it translates to darkness in us because we do not have the capacity, our inner spiritualness, to take on this great light. It would be sort of blown away, I guess. So the idea is, not the idea, is John of the Cross experience is, I am in the light, but it is appearing to me as darkness. Now, whereas on the other hand, since Rufus doesn't bother with John of the Cross's way of doing things, he feels that the inner light is something that you can experience. And so, and Jesus is this light. So private prayer and corporate forms of meditation belong together, so that the Quaker is not getting together every day. He doesn't do daily mass or daily gatherings. So the Quaker gets together with others for a corporate form of meditation. Many Catholics have problems sitting quietly in church, even waiting for Mass to start. So many people, they say, let's say the rosary. We're sitting here quiet. Let's do something. Let's talk. Let's have words. And this is part of our tradition because, in part, we just don't do well left alone in silence and stillness. So many of us. So the Quaker idea, and Rufus Jones is speaking of this, is private prayer. Your prayer at home, your prayer anyway, which can have words as well. And but it's more deeper meditation, less words, fewer words. And the corporate sitting together, that's two ways of doing it. Because what you want is a silence, not empty, just means silence. You're not talking. And you're not paying attention to rapid thoughts one after the other in your mind. It's a silent receptivity to this inner light. Because when you experience the inner light, you will begin to be transformed, which means you'll begin to let go of your own inner darkness. There'll be as Thomas Keating would say, a kind of an inner cleansing of ourselves so that we are better able to love another human being. And so with this receptivity to the inner light, there will be, I guess what you call revelatory openings is what he calls it, revelatory openings. In other words, there'll be aha moments, not just aha, what is the meaning of life, but aha, I'm the problem. I've got faults and failings. So see, this is the same thing Thomas Keating would say, Thomas Merton would say, God of Unknowing. They're just coming at it from a different perspective. You get these, what you get is, one of the revelatory openings could be, what do I need to surrender, to let go of? Somebody reminded me of this recently. It's something that I read. So, I'm trying to downsize my life. Although you wouldn't know it with all those hats on the wall. But, any case, I'm trying to let go of things, not to have so much stuff in my life. And I'm doing a fairly good job of it in Boulder. I did a pretty good job of it. And I need to get to my room out in San Francisco and work on that one too. whenever COVID allows. But someone reminded me, you also have to think about it. It's easier to let go of your stuff than things than it is to let go of you with all your faults and failings, and your fears, your anxieties, so on, that sort of stuff. He says that's the really hard stuff to let go of. And we need a more meditative, contemplative life for that to happen. First of all, they have to be revealed. And secondly, we need the energy of this power, the inner light, to help us, work with us to gradually let go of these things. The unloading of the unconscious, Thomas Keating calls it. And so with these revelatory openings to how we get in the way of ourselves, what will begin to happen, and that's Rufus's experience, is there will be joyful service to others. So after the surrender, we can do joyful service to others. Now, I have met people who have done service to others. They do it with resentment. They resent being of service. Some of it's false pride. Some of us they did only out of fear, but they really didn't want to do it. It wasn't coming from the heart, from the inner light. They did it because they were told to do it, so they were being obedient. But it wasn't joyful. So what we want is to be of service to others with joy. And the only way, we can't decide to do it. It has to be, the energy has to be opened within us when we make space for that energy by getting rid of the stuff, our selfish, self-centered way of life. I mean, I know this for myself. When I'm cooking, by the way, the next 2 weeks, it'll be cooking and contemplation. When I'm cooking, I have to ask myself this question. How are you doing the food preparation? Are you doing it with joyful service? I really love being of service to the monks. I like feeding the monks. I like preparing good food for them. These are my brothers. I love them. Or these are worthless monks. They can cook, but they're too darn lazy. They only think of themselves. They live in their own orbits. I resent doing this. I hope they choke. In either case, they're going to get fed. But am I being spiritually evolved? No, I'm a mess. I'm an absolute mess. Can be the same thing. I got this collar on, you being of service to people, and it says, oh, Father, will you come anoint my dying spouse? Okay. Then you go out and says, I anoint you, you pain in the neck. I don't say it, but I'm thinking that I got better things. The 49ers were on television playing football. What am I out here doing with you? That's my team. So it's not joyful, but I'm being of service. Well, I don't want to live that way. I'd rather have the inner light, not the inner darkness coming out on my face. So I want joyful service to others. It's already come with some surrender. And the surrender is not going to come because I'm going to surrender. It's going to become because I allow God to work within me by the quiet meditation. So what he says is thinking about God is fine. Oh, Thomas Keating be turning over in his grave if he had a body, but he was cremated, so I don't think he's turning over. But thinking about God is okay. So he's not an apophatic guy. But he's not worried about monkey mind. I think that's one of the things that Keating, Thomas Merton, Buddhists, all talking about, the monkey mind. And he's not worried about the monkey mind. It's just not part of his thing. And it could be in part because they gather together on, say, a weekly basis. And they get kind of the energy, even though you might yourself have kind of a busy mind. enough people around you have enough stillness within them that that kind of energy comes out from them into you, which is why I wish Catholics would sit in church more and do nothing but learn to meditate. Because one who is having a lot of trouble with it will gain the energy from another who's having a really good experience instead of words, 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 or preach, 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 or ritual, ritual, ritual. I mean, it's not that they're bad. It's just that what's missing is the allowing of the inner light to come out by your silence and stillness. So I think that Rufus has got something to say to us. But thinking about God is fine. Thinking about what you're going to make for dinner is not fine. And so I think that we have to have refined thoughts about God. And we have to let those thoughts come to us rather than trying to conjure them up. And I think somebody like Henry David Thoreau would be of some service here. We'll get to him in a minute. I'll get back to him since I already gave a talk on him. But I'm thinking you allow God to bring Goddish thoughts, if you will, to you, rather than conjure up thoughts. And I think that in my tradition, we have so many holy cards and novenas and pious practices so that we can get thoughts about God. And that's okay too. But what Rufus is suggesting, and what I would suggest, and I think what works better for me, is to allow God to bring it to me. And it may not happen in the meditation. My meditations may be, very quiet, just a sense of presence, but not any thought about God. But then later, there could be some thought. What would be a thought about God? I see something in the world. Now, remember, we think of God as creator, creative force, an energy behind and beneath and within the universe. And I see something with these eyes. And it goes to sort of an inner eye. I see more than that something. It would be the way Henry David Thoreau would look at a tree. He doesn't see firewood. Or he doesn't necessarily, he sees something deeper than tree. And I think that's a bit of the whole Quaker mentality. And I think it is very much part of our Western tradition, if you will. So something I said earlier, and I'm not going to expand on this now, I've been talking a little bit about Rufus, is the early 20th century, when Rufus was getting into his writings and publishing and so on and so forth. What did we have? We had wars, World War I, World War II. We had the 1920s, all that wild stuff in the stock market booming. Then the Depression, my church with anti-modernism. But what was starting to come in a little bit around the edges was Buddhism and Hinduism. Swamis and Rishis were beginning to come to this country. Their books were beginning to be translated, well, they were writing, and books began to be translated into English, things called sutras, the Vedanta, just a bit on the horizon. And after World War II, there was this, what came out of all this kind of misery of destructions of Europe and a lot of the world, was people had a desire for something more than what they will find in an organized religion. And the church, my church, which was not much interested in dialoguing with other traditions or learning anything from other traditions, it was Catholic or else, was up against not being able, just the beginnings of not being able to satisfy this deeper hunger because we had let it go. This was part of our earliest tradition. What did Jesus do? he would do joyful service, and then he would go out into a quiet, lonely place to be by himself. This is right in the Gospels. I'm not making it up. And what would his disciples do? They went and got him and said, people want you. Get busy. So Rufus says, you can't just get busy. You got to have the quiet, still time. His disciples couldn't get that early on. But we began to get it a little bit later. And when we began to lose that, that's when the desert tradition of the desert monks and desert mothers began, when the church got very commercial and very acceptable. And then what you have is my faith and my making as much money as I can goes right together. And it doesn't. So what was happening with people like Thomas Merton he joined the monastery in 1941, as I think did Thomas Keating. But World War II had already begun, not in this country yet, but it had been going on in Europe. And then, of course, we had Pearl Harbor. But he was already searching for something from the, being in the Depression and all, with something deeper, something more. And so was Keating. And that was the contemplative tradition. So Rufus was in touch with that, and in touch with that need. And Quakers don't have a lot of ritual, but they do have a lot of meditation and a lot of joyful service to the world. They're very much service oriented. So when Buddhism and Hinduism began to be heard about in the 1960s, let's say, and then remember the Beatles? Well, if you're too young, you remember the Beatles. Well, the Beatles got into some of this stuff, at least in their dress and so on and so forth. And some of that interest, they were a very popular band. And people had this search. They were looking, and Buddhism and Hinduism was speaking to them. And Christianity was not. But on the edges we were. In the 1950s, for instance, right after Rufus died, by the way, I think he had an influence because he was for toleration in matters of conscience. The Quakers were about pacifism, not fighting. They don't see any solution in killing. But they were for toleration in matters of conscience. Of course, what they believed is you had to form your conscience, which of course would come with the meditation and with the group helping you to see how you could serve best in love. So a conscience is formed when obligations become central, because obligations have to do with others. And this is where I think the Quakers were up against a lot of the idea of the individual, my rights. We wrote our Declaration of Independence, we wrote our Constitution in this country, and then we had the Bill of Rights. I have rights. And we even hear this today. And rights are often about me, myself, and I. He says a formed conscience thinks about others. Think of, say, the common good. And the Quakers don't see the common good in war. But if you have a formed conscience and you differ, we tolerate you. Not this kind of thing where the left and the right don't even listen, talk to one another, they just yell at one another. In other words, there will be other opinions. There will be other ways of seeing things. So it's not as if Rufus says the apophatic way is no good. He says it's very few people do it or can do it, and it's not for me. I mean, that'd be the way he is. But the Catholic Church began to form in the 1950s a more say, Vatican-centered ecumenical organization, just beginning to be formed in the 50s and then into the 60s, because we had a Paulist who was part of that. Father Thomas Stransky passed away a couple of years ago. So, in other words, the Catholic Church was getting involved, but it was so small and so off to the side that for the main line, it was still Catholic or burn. But there was something developing. And now we're years and years away, over half a century away, that we now see all this. But people didn't know about all this. They didn't know about all the books. They didn't know about all meditation that had been written for centuries. So Rufus says the goal of the spiritual life is to bring this light to an awareness, to an experience within me. That is the inner light. I don't make the inner light happen. It's inner. It's here. John of the Cross discovered it in a darkness, as he explained it. Rufus' experience is a little bit different, but it's still the inner light. And he says, become aware of it in your experience, because that experience will energize you to act a certain way, to love another human being, and to be of service with joy. So you could have it with the apophatic experience or with a cataphatic experience. I would say, if I had to say which one was Rufus, not that he would agree, I'd say more cataphatic. All right, he comes to experience through a thought, if you will. But mysticism is, from, I believe, his perspective, is to have an immediate relationship without an intermediary. An immediate relationship without a church to tell you how to have that relationship, or a synagogue, or a book. They are all valuable. They can all be supportive. But ultimately, mysticism is the immediate relationship with this inner light, which he says is Jesus Christ, such that your life begins to be changed. You let go of the best and you live the energy. So he's not much of a cloud of unknowing, which means he read it. He was reading the cloud of unknowing when most people in my tradition didn't even know it existed. And we wrote it. So he says, you don't reduce the field of vision to all that is not God. That'd be Thomas Merton. Reduce your vision to anything that's not God. Reduce your vision. Let go of it. It's not God. Let go of it. Well, a tree. Henry David Thoreau thought that would reveal the divine in some way, shape, or form. Keep that in mind, you who say, oh, I have problems with this apophatic stuff. It's not quite working for me. Okay, so it's not for you. Maybe you got some Quaker genes in you. Go for it. So he says, let your awareness. So I sense in my meditation, I have an awareness of the presence. I think I'm a Quaker. I have an awareness of the presence. Just presence. I have an awareness of something that's more than, and yet intimately involved with me. And I kind of get absorbed in it for moments here and there. Well, that would be kind of cataphatic, not apophatic. But let's not, parse things too much. Just to know, some people say to me, well, I have this sense of inner experience and I'm trying to let it go so I can go deeper. You don't go deeper. God takes you deeper. If God wants to take me to where I don't even know I'm in the room, that's fine. But I have more of what Rufus is talking about, I think, an awareness of, I call it presence. And my eyes are closed, so it's kind of a darkness, but I believe it is a light. John of the Cross, a little bit of each. He says, rare souls can be apophatic. So just Lane, not to worry about it. Rare souls are apophatic, but it's not the norm. You know, I used to rack my brain trying to think Therese of Lisieux, one of my favorites. Well, I said, when was she into the, the deep centering? Well, I don't know that she was. I think she was more cataphatic. I think she more found God in, a rose, a flower, another saint, acting, uh, accepting another person who didn't like her, the little way. She didn't create the little way. It's been around for a while. She popularized it. So, you know, I just tell you how crazy I am. So I'm reading something about Therese recently. She says, I'm nothing. And I don't mind being nothing. I'm not important. And she dies in 1897, and she's made a saint in 1925. Everybody's reading her autobiography. So you know what I said one day? I'm sitting here in the monastery saying, I'm nothing here. I'm not important anymore. I used to be a big deal in a parish, everybody looking for me to do this and that. Oh, Father, you're wonderful. I say, here, I'm nothing. And then I said, I'll be like Therese. 25 years after I die, I'll be important. That's craziness, you see. But I caught it after saying it, thinking it, and saying, see, that's God revealing me to myself, but in a joyful way, because it's funny. Well, it's tragic, but it's funny to me because I just said, let it go. I didn't harm anybody with it. You just realize yourself and says, that's another one of those things to let go of. So, and I think that was the energy of Therese of Lisieux, who I pray to each day to help me let go of my craziness. So, become absorbed in God with this awareness. So, affirmative mysticism, I love this word, is an immediate experience through the finite. That's Henry David Thoreau, and 19th century American, okay? Immediate experience through the finite, through a tree. You look at a tree and you let go of its utilitarian purpose. Practical thoughts about the tree. The tree is shade. The tree is fuel. The tree gets in the way of me wanting to plant crops. I'll chop it down. So the tree will help me build my house. He just looks at a tree and sees something of the infinite, if you will, or an immediate experience of what I call presence through looking at nature, okay? So I often say to people, they say, well, I have trouble just sitting. I said, why don't you take a walk in nature? Which is probably not a housing development, but someplace where there's some of God's creation, trees, flowers, plants, grass, dirt, if you will, openness, and just be open to it. Don't be out for it, anaerobic exercise or something like that. So you just walk slowly enough to be able to be aware of what's going on, which I often do here. So finite creation is the divine mirror of the infinite. That's what he says. Not Thoreau, Rufus. Finite creation is the divine mirror of the infinite. God reveals God's self. So if you are a person who sits in quiet meditation for half an hour, or apophatic tradition or whatever, cataphatic, then you get up and you're a bit busy the rest of the day, you're missing out. Rufus said you're missing out, and you're really not going to be transformed. You need to be in touch with finite things, created things, because that's the divine mirror of the infinite. And this could happen in art. It could happen in a museum with ballet, opera, all kinds of the arts, as we say. And which is why I think that's an important part of educating young people, And it's something that's been dropped because we're so much interested in science, engineering, math, and technology, so that you can get a job. But you won't be evolved as the human being God made you to be. So we need to be able to look at things that are creative and created even by the human condition, that has got something of the divine in it, which might not be a skyscraper. Uh, so what he's saying is don't flee the everyday. Uh, you don't want to. See, finite creation. That's Francis I, our Pope. That's ecology. That's Francis of Assisi, for instance. Francis of Assisi, I don't think is a centering prayer guy. I don't think he's apophatic. I don't think he's cloud of unknowing, which hadn't been written. At least he has that excuse. It hadn't been written yet. I think he was much more into the world around him. Brother, sun, sister, moon, those kinds of things. So he says, don't flee the everyday. Not, I don't think Francis of Assisi fled the everyday. Don't flee the everyday, says Rufus. Because the everyday is where not only will you see something of the divine, but maybe you'll see it in another person and you want to be of service to the needs of that person. And you want to do it joyfully because there's a love of that person. You're not doing it, you're not a social worker, okay? You could be a social worker, but it comes from a deep inner experience. So he says, don't erase the self. He says the self is important. But if you have the inner light, you'll be rid of what Thomas Merton called the false self. Rufus was dead before Thomas Merton came up with the false self. I think he was the one who brought that. What is the false self? That's who you think you are with all your faults and your failings and your ideas for grandiosity or your fears or whatever it is. That's me frequently, the false self. So he says, don't erase the truer self, is what Merton would call it. But he didn't have false self, true self. He says, you got yourself. So don't try to escape it. But through your meditation, let God lift the parts that are useless, that just aren't helpful to you anymore, so that you become let's say, a purer, better, more loving self. I think he probably would have agreed with Thomas Merton about the false self. But what he doesn't want to do, because, by the way, he did study and experience and travel about Buddhism and Hinduism and so on and so forth. It's not as if he was unaware of these things. This man was a lifelong learner, and he's not looking to empty the mind, become a blank, none of that stuff. He says, because it's yourself who's going to be of loving service to others. So get in touch with it and let it become its best. So awaken this self to its inherent God-likeness. That would be the true self. Its inherent God-likeness. So awaken it. Notice he's a little bit more awakened rather than let it be awakened. And I think part of that comes from our American can do. We can do. It's our mentality. But you have to place yourself in the presence of God. So I think let's look at it this way. We participate in the divine energy with our own purer energy, less energized by our faults and failings, such as selfishness, self-centeredness, fears, anxieties, and so on. It's a competitive world. So we celebrate our enfleshed existence. So don't beat it up. He's not for ascesis. Now, back to Ghislaine Miller and her Carmelites, and maybe some of the old Trappists, the way they lived, just didn't eat enough, didn't, take care of the physical body. Well, he wouldn't be for that kind of stuff. He says that celebrate your enfleshed existence. Don't beat it up. So celebrate that you have this body that God has given you, and and live in a healthy fashion. That is not an unhealthy fashion, but celebrate that you have this. It's, in other words, some people say my body is my problem. No, your faults are your problem, and you live them out in your body. But your body's the victim of your psychological condition developed over years of the way you were brought up, the way the culture is, and so on and so forth. I don't know where it all, well, let's give you a couple of ideas where it came from. Greed is good, that sort of stuff. So, but the body is it's part of God's creation. So celebrate it, take care of it. Don't drive it into the ground by running yourself ragged. Some of these people, I won't name the town, but they run and they run and run and run. They beat themselves up, they compete, they kill themselves. He wouldn't be for that. How about moderation? Do something on a regular basis. Quakers don't sit all day long meditating. So don't beat up your body. And I try not to do that here. Try to get enough sleep, enough food at the monastery, enough rest, and be careful because you only got the one body, and it's only going to be around so long. As someone said, we're all got a ticket to the cemetery. That's our destination. But I don't want to be on the express. I want to be in the local that makes some stops along the way to enjoy the beauty of God's creation. So yeah, I know I got a ticket, but I want it to be a local. I don't know if it will be, but I want it to be. So he speaks about the book he read. We didn't know about it. I certainly didn't know about it in my Catholic training. Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. What did he write? Practice of the Presence. Here's a nice Catholic guy, right? He's in the, what is he? I think the 1300s. I think maybe the 1400s. He's back there with the cloud of unknowing. And he says, he's a little bit different than the cloud of unknowing. He writes, practice of the presence. Everywhere you can see the presence of God if you can see first with the outer eye, then with the inner eye, which will come from meditation, however you do it. And so he liked the practice of the presence because it was seeing the presence in things, in people, in nature, and so on like that. Brother Lawrence, Practice of the Presence, we'll have it in our bookstore if we don't have it now. It's a very skinny book, so it's not going to cost you much. Lovely book, very practical from this man who was a nobody, okay, another nobody, wrote this and became famous. So, so if you feel like you're a nobody now, write a book of your religious experiences, and after you die, you'll be a somebody, I suppose. Any case, so think of another thing is think of Therese of Lisieux, died 1897, another nobody in her day. She practices seeing God in little ways. Or as she popularized the little way, she sees God in little ways, little things that are going on. She even sees God in people who are not nice to her. She sees the presence of God. Well, that's got to come from a little bit of meditation, right? So she was able to do it. She dies at 24. I mean, talk about evolved at a very young age. It's extraordinary. Speaking of the extraordinary, what does he say? He says the same thing the Buddha said. The extraordinary is in the ordinary. Rufus Jones said that. The extraordinary is in the ordinary. I don't have to go to church, to a church, to find God. It's not that you shouldn't or couldn't. You could, but you don't have to. God is everywhere. In creation, if we can just let ourselves be opened, or open ourselves, as Rufus might say, awaken ourselves by our practice to seeing the ordinary, and seeing extraordinary things from it. you got to slow down. You got to be on the local train, not the express. Whenever you say, I have no time, you're on the express. Now, a fact of human life is the group, not the rugged individual who stands alone. So Rufus sees the fact of human life is about group. And so the Quakers like to get together as group. They don't want to be little desert fathers and mothers in their little huts and cells and tree trunks and caves. They want to get together with one another. So they're not about living in their own separate orbits. That's one of the dangers of the monastic life. You can become a bunch of people living separately under one roof, and you call yourself a community, but the best you ever do is tolerate one another and basically avoid each other as best as possible. He says, now, the fact of human life is the group with all its messiness. So Quakers have to deal with the messiness. Not Ayn Rand's rugged individual. Another early 20th century person talks about the rugged individual who stands alone over against. Well, Rufus wouldn't buy into that. He feels that the well-being of each person depends upon the health of others. That's called the common good nowadays. It's not all about you. It's about the common good. And listening to, and maybe just sometimes listening to other people who have experts on what is the common good. And instead of making up your own mind out of, whatever you're hearing, the well-being of each depends upon the health of others. Very important, I think, for today. And that's very Quaker. So he wouldn't be so much into neoliberal capitalism, we call today the invisible hand. I make as much as I can, and that'll dribble down to help others. Or I'll use my wealth for charity. Well, how did you make your wealth in the first place? These are questions the Quakers might ask. So love is the energy for groupthink. Not greed is good. Not greed is good. Love is the energy of groupthink. And I started out this morning with him saying that the thing that you have to keep in mind is the single greatest help to a spiritual life is deep human love for another person. It's easy to love everybody, very hard to love one person. So love is the energy for this group think. When those Quakers sit together, they have to have love for one another, not toleration. They can tolerate different opinions of things from a formed conscience. And so they believe that the heavenly kingdom is here. But we can't see it because we don't live as if it's here. Jesus Christ said, the kingdom is in your midst. And then he told you what to do. Read the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plains. Read his wisdom sayings. So you got to go the second mile, though, for that. And that's part of Jesus' teaching. Go the second mile. That's about love, compassion, kindness. So they were very much against Vietnam. And a lot of people said they wanted to become Quakers rather than be drafted. They had an anti-Vietnam sentiment. They were like Dorothy Day in that sense. Love, compassion, and kindness. And you might say, well, they're idiots. Okay, so how are you loving? I'm not saying you can't have a different opinion, but you have to then ask yourself, how are you being loving to another human being in which you let go of your needs to become a we? So you lose, he says, here's something that's a challenge. He says, you lose the inner light. Remember, Jesus Christ is the inner light. He says you lose the inner light by going into your inner cell to build a domain undisturbed. That could be very hermit-like or monastic. So you got to be careful when you do that. that you are still going to be connected with the community. And I believe that there's something to be said for that. So you just go into your inner cell to be undisturbed. How are you living the rest of your life? I think we gotta look at those. He would say you got to look at those things. A great challenge, I think, to the monastic life as it's lived in the United States by men or women. Said you gotta. So, but in the 20th century, that was not an issue in the Catholic Church because we weren't teaching meditation at all. And monasteries were more about manual labor and prayers with lots of words and rituals. So even the monasteries had lost it and they needed to rediscover it as well. He says you got to reach out and build. Reach out and build. Build a better world by all the service that you provide. And I bet if you would look around at places, I would bet you that of the organizations that are trying to help out in Afghanistan right now that the military is gone, there's helping organizations getting in there. I would bet you the Quakers are one of them that are in there trying to be helpful to others in a loving fashion and not judging them because they're whatever they are. So he says that inner poverty, well, that's very monastic, very Carmelite, Trappist, whatever, Cistercian, Camaldolese. Inner poverty is to be for others. It's not just having a simple life to be more hassle-free and then living in your own little orbit, disconnected from others. And just living in the same building doesn't necessarily connect you. I mean, people, I know there are marriages which are basically arrangements. They live in the same house, but they don't have much to do with one another except for practical situations. Inner poverty is to be for others. So if you're going to simplify your life, as I'm trying to do with my stuff and being challenged to let go of my inner stuff, it's for others, to be for others, not just to have fewer things in my closet or fewer running shoes. Can anybody have too many running shoes? Oh, well. So I don't think he'd be much. Okay, I'm back. Whoa, I almost got lost. Well, we're just about at an hour. So I think we'll stop for 10 minutes. It's 9:29. Let's say it's 9:30. Assuming my internet holds up, Chris Lake, I am going to be back here in 10 minutes, which is 9:40, at which time we are going to do a 20-minute silence and stillness meditation, be it centering prayer, whatever Quaker thing you do. We're going to do that for 20 minutes, and then we'll have a little Q&A, okay? So now it's 9:30. 9:40, we'll be back.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be back at 9:40 Mountain Time.
And you'll tell them how they can support me through Zoom and sending checks to the ministry?
I'll do that on chat right now.
Good. So I stay out of debtor's prison. Thank you.
Some people might want to send you to debtor's prison. I don't know. That might not be a good thing. But anyway, I will put that on chat.
Well, I'm back. We still have officially another minute, but as some of you are on, glad that you stayed. And let's see, we have over 20 again. This is always nice to see that we're getting a few more people. I don't know if it's because COVID is driving everybody inside or what, but we've at one point, I think when COVID was thought to be just about defeated, we couldn't even get 10 people to show up because everybody wanted to get outside. But then 70 or 80 would check the recording. So now people are coming inside. Plus, I think SOS is very much into getting together with one another on these once a month Saturday mornings. Okay, well, it's 9:40, and welcome back to everybody. I see there's a bunch of chats. Zoom session is free, but you can support me on sending me a check to the monastery or to Terry-Ryan-25 on Venmo, if you use Venmo. And next 2 Saturdays, 9 o'clock Central Time, no, 9 o'clock Mountain Time, 11 o'clock East Coast Time, we will be doing cooking and contemplation. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And that'll be Zoom, same number, same Zoom number, no password. So, and you can always check snowmassbookstore.com for the recording, which should be up by tonight or tomorrow morning. Now, we are going to do a 20-minute center, 20-minute silent meditation. Mary, do you have the bell? You're the SOS timer.
Terry, not me this time because I'm too sleepy. I might not make it.
Okay, who's going to do it? Nobody? I can do it. All right, I'll do it. I'm going to be the timer. Just let me get my my time thing right. Timer. All right, we're going to do 20 minutes. Now, so what I do, I invite you to, you don't have to close your eyes. You don't have to be seated, but just, I tend to close my eyes and I'll be seated. And we'll just be silent and still. We pray the inner light that you will open us to your presence, that we might become all you meant us to be. Let us begin. Okay, when you're ready, just open your eyes. Welcome back to the room, as we say. Now, let's see if there are any questions you could put in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, Father Terry. Always a help. Looking forward to seeing all of you next week. I enjoy baking, but not cooking per se. Okay, well, we won't say who said that. But I bake bread as well. Yeah. While you're thinking of questions, you can also just unmute. Here's an example of what happens when you develop a deeper spiritual life. You get in touch with your faults. You catch yourself getting in touch with a fault rather than living it out. And then you see a different way of acting. So in those 10 minutes when we were away, I went down to the kitchen. I'm going to make pizza later this morning. I already made the crust yesterday. Any case, I walk into the kitchen and the breakfast dishes are still sitting in their racks. No one has turned on the dishwasher to do the breakfast dishes. The countertops have not been cleaned off. The butter and jellies and all have not been put back in the refrigerator. And someone's supposed to do that, but he didn't. My first thought is he's a worthless human being. The only reason he's in the monastery is running away from life. All this meditation has taken him no place. He's selfish and self-centered. Why doesn't he do his job? What am I supposed to do it now? Because I have to cook? Boom, boom, boom. Thought. But I caught myself. As opposed to spending the rest of the day being resentful because of something that someone else didn't do, he may not even care about. So I thought, oh, here's it. You have to be loving to the people with whom you live, not because they're the way you want them to be, but because the energy for love is coming from yourself. This is what I think you have to be aware of. And unless you can kind of get that, it doesn't, it doesn't quite work. So that's just one example of how it is. And I think that we're most able to get in touch with our shortcomings when we're in relationships. The desert monk said, sit in your cell and your cell will teach you everything. Maybe. But I think what it will teach you, it might teach you your faults, but you might not get to practice how to be loving since you're sitting in your cell learning all about your faults. When are you going to actually practice it? So this is something to keep in mind.
Brother Terry,
Yes,
Rosemary, can I say something?
of course.
Okay, I was listening to you talking about apophatic and cataphatic, and I think you can be both eventually, because when we learn with the centering prayer, centering prayer is the method to become contemplative, and we have our groups, and when we sit in the group, the energy from all of the prayer is felt, and like you were saying with the energy, and then outside, if anything comes up during your prayer, you usually get the fruits of that after the prayer, not during the prayer. And so it's like you gave an example of yourself, of something that occurred to you, and you relate it back maybe to an insight when you were sitting in the prayer, but you don't get it during the prayer. I don't know if I'm making any sense to you, but I think the cataphatic, the apophatic leads to cataphatic, because we do the charities, and Richard Raw has the Center for Action and Contemplation. They do contemplation and then they do the action. And I just think that I think the two, one follows the other. I think that you can be both, because, and then with the groups. That's why Father Keating started the contemplative outreach, because we all need support of one another to maintain our prayer, to stay true to the prayer and belong. And one last thing I want to just say to you, I know I'm taking up too much time. The Baltimore Catechism, when I was a little girl, I learned that where is God? God is everywhere. And I've always seen God in everything. And I'm 91 years old and I'm still trying to get on the right path here. So you're helping me out.
Okay, good. And I think those are good points. At its best, they both can work together. And it's just nice to have people like Rufus Jones who emphasize one side so
Yeah.
that we can keep the balance.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have enjoyed reading his book or his writings. He writes so well and so poetic and so beautifully. He gets his points across so nicely, and I so agree with him. I grew up in the congregational tradition, which is like the Puritans, but they were coming out of their more in the 60s and 70s, where they became more working for a better society than they were as looking at all our faults. So I feel like I could be, I think I would be more of a follower of Rufus Jones than I would be Thomas Merton. I mean, I do think both are helpful, but I enjoy Rufus Jones so much better.
Well, I think one of the things about people like Thomas Merton and Thomas Keating is their lifestyle is not the lifestyle of most people. So they're having an experience and then talking about living that experience out in the world, but they don't live in the world. They live in their world. And so, I don't know what Thomas Keating did as a young monk. I assume that he did manual labor. But the only Thomas Keating I knew was the one who was a post-abbot after he was an abbot and lived here. And he basically traveled and taught.
Yeah.
I don't know that he had any job in the monastery that I can think of. And he was still a relatively young man when he came here. And Merton talks about working out in the fields, which he did as a young monk, because I think at hay season, they all had to work in the fields. But I got the impression that a lot of his life really was teaching and writing. He was the novice director. It's not a lot of physical labor in novice directing. Their lives.
Yeah. If you go to where Thomas Merton was, he has his own little building that he lived in by himself.
He also lived in the tower.
A tower, or I thought he had like a little shed that he lived in, or he went and rode in, or he spent a lot of time in. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they said our Bishop Brian really likes Thomas Merton, and so we have learned a lot about him. And he just said he was not a group person, and it took a lot for him to be part of the group, and that was his thing. So I think that's very interesting. Maybe I do think both apathetic and cataphatic are very important. But I really tend toward the cataphathic.
Cataphatic, yeah, having a thought about God.
Yeah, much more for me. Yeah.
But in any case, Rufus Jones lived in the world.
Yes.
He was married. His wife died when he was practically newly married. He had a child, and he remarried,
Yeah.
as did Howard Thurman, for that matter. And we
Yeah.
talked about Howard Thurman. These people lived in the world,
Yeah.
and they walked the walk.
Yeah.
They didn't just talk the talk. And I think for an American, it's important to you have to walk the walk. I think for us, because we're so actively involved in solving issues, whether we act wrong or solve wrong. We're about solving issues, and the monastic life can reveal a lot about the person, because they can spend a lot of time, like a Merton has a purpose, a Keating has a purpose, but ultimately they're not walking the walk. Let's face it, they're not,
Mhm.
and you are.
Yeah.
So learn what you can learn. But I think, as a matter of fact, I'm not so sure that Henry David Thoreau really, he did walk the walk some. That is true. He took care of his father. He ran a pencil business. So he did make something of a living. That was their job. That was the Thoreaus, their pencil business.
Yeah.
And, but he liked to get away and be with Henry David Thoreau. And he learned a lot, and he taught us a lot by that. So we need those people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we have to live the life. And I think that you get gems from people like people like Rufus. He says not the well-being depends on one another. We know that. But he says you've got to love another human being, not tolerate them and put up with them, or say, I love you, but I'm not going to have much to do with you because I'm in my own little tower,
Yes.
if you will. So I
Yeah.
think we need to just keep that in mind, which is why it's important to not just talk about the Mertons and the Keatings and the Penningtons, but to talk about people who really did things with and for one another on a regular basis. I think Lawrence of the Resurrection was the doorkeeper. And
Yeah.
they had a lot of people coming and going from their monastery. He had to welcome people and deal with people and help people on a regular basis. So he didn't live in a tower.
Yeah.
So I think that's just important to keep in mind in terms of what we're talking about now. I think we'll just end with that, because we have two more Saturdays. The first Saturday of October will be from here in the monastery, and the first Saturday of November could very well be from Sea Ranch, California, if it hasn't burnt down by then. It's along the ocean, 115 miles north of San Francisco. My sister and I vacation there, and we rent a little house by the sea, and we spend a week there cooking and one another, visiting, taking walks, and so on and so forth. Very, very wonderful life. And they have an internet. Hopefully it's working. So that could be the beginning of November, if COVID allows me to get out of here at all. But for the next 2 weeks at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, we'll be doing cooking and contemplation. So silence is hard for a newbie. So you just practice it. So I'll see you all, and this will be recorded. This is recorded. It should be on our snowmass.com site, telling you exactly where to go on snowmass.com to pick it up. So you all take care. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Father Terry,
Yes.
it's Irene. Are you
Wait. Whoops. I lost it.
going to be at the monastery in November?
Yeah. If I go to California, I should be back here by the second week in November sometime.
Okay,
A
I'll
lot-
see ya.
Yeah, a lot depends on whether the mountain pass is open and there's no snow.
Okay,
So they close Glenwood Canyon because of avalanches, and I don't do Vail Pass in the snow. So one of those days I'll be back. Okay, take good care. We'll see you all later.
Father
Bye-bye.
Terry,
Yes,
when is Father Damien still there?
of course. He's going to be here for quite a while.
Tell him that Michael Moran said hello.
Michael Moran from where?
Well, I live in London, but he knows me from Spencer. I mean,
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
he's out here for a while helping us with something. All right. Take care.
great. All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.